I know you love earning travel rewards and cash back, and that's why you're going to love Rakuten. With Rakuten, you can earn cash back on everything you need to book your dream trip, hotels, flights, rental cars, experiences, and more, while still booking through your favorite travel sites. And don't worry, cash back can be earned on top of earning the credit card points and the hotel and airline loyalty points that matter most to you, depending on how you make your booking. Plus, with Rakuten, you can also earn cash back on groceries and other purchases like electronics, pet supplies, and more. And the best part, you can join today for free and start earning cash back on top of your travel rewards. Go to Rakuten.com or get the app. That's Rakuten, Rakuten. Rakuten, the most rewarding way to shop. Countries are stories. They are illusions that lend necessary structure to the world. That is a quote from today's guest, Eric Czuleger. He is an American journalist and author whose recent book, You Are Not Here, Travels Through Countries That Don't Exist, is about his year living in only unrecognized nations such as Iraqi Kurdistan and Kosovo, and it was really geared to answer this one question. What is a country? A small question, but a big one. We had an amazing, wide-ranging conversation you'll hear today. Some of the topics we touch on include storytelling and the media.
You look at the news and it seems like we're all on a ticking time bomb ready to explode. But the world is a remarkably robust place, and the media is remarkably good at making us terrified.
Culture and identity.
When you're in a culture, you suddenly have this other code switch that you've just performed on yourself, and there's a new consensus around you. And then you have to realize, okay, well, how much of this harmonizes with what was back home? How much of this is able to confirm or deny the beliefs that I had previously? And that's a really exciting part about travel, because that's the point that you realize like how alike we actually are.
His near-death experience in South Africa.
He struck me across the head. It's sort of back in my hair. Struck me across the head with a knife.
You'll also hear how to appear invisible on the street and stay safe anywhere in the world, the most obscure travel recommendation you've ever heard. We discuss the future of nation states, reverse culture shock, his brief stint as an intelligence analyst, expat life in Albania, and loads more. It's all happening right now in this episode, so buckle up, strap in. Thanks for being here, and welcome to the Zero to Travel podcast, my friend.
You're listening to the Zero to Travel podcast, where we explore exciting travel-based work, lifestyle, and business opportunities, helping you to achieve your wildest travel dreams. And now your host, world wanderer and travel junkie, Jason Moore.
Hey, it's Jason here with ZeroToTravel.com. Welcome to the show. Thanks for hanging out, letting me bring a little travel into your ears today. This is the show to help you travel the world on your terms, to fill your life with as much travel as you desire, no matter what your situation or experience. And one big reason why I wanted to have Eric on is most of us are probably not going to get to travel to one of these unrecognized nations. You've probably never been before and might not ever go. He spent a year living in Iraqi Kurdistan, Kosovo, Transnistria, I think I'm pronouncing that right, Liberland, and Somaliland. The adventure took him from being a third grade teacher in northern Iraq to being Liberland's ambassador to Somaliland. He's got a ton of stories, and we get to go on the journey a bit today and hear about those experiences. His book, once again, You Are Not Here, travels through countries that don't exist. We'll link up to it in the show notes. In the book, he says, quote, I hope this book leads the reader to ask big questions about what it means to be a citizen of their own nation. End quote. Today, we do our best to unpack that big question along with many others. I hope you enjoy it, and stick around on the back end. I'll share another quote from Eric's book that might just have you shaking your head in agreement if this is one of the big reasons why you travel as well. Eric lays out why he travels, and I'm wondering if this is perhaps one of the reasons why you do as well. So stick around for that. In the meantime, please enjoy my chat with Eric, and I'll see you on the other side, my friend. Cheers. Eric Czuleger, welcome to the Zero to Travel podcast, my friend.
Thanks. Super happy to be here. I love talking about travel, man. It's been a significant portion of my life for the last decade.
Yeah, thanks. I'm so glad you reached out, because when you sent me your book, which of course we're going to talk about today and everything, I'm just like, all right, I know this guy has some stories. Yeah, but you're in Albania, right?
Yeah, currently I've been in Albania for probably about 4 years in the capital city, but previously I was a Peace Corps volunteer, which is kind of like the opposite of the American Army. They send liberal arts majors out into the developing world to make sure that everybody is taught English, or to work on community development programs. And the deal is they get to choose the country for you. So my country was Albania, and pretty much that's why I've ended up here.
Yeah, is that the dictionary definition of Peace Corps? If you look it up, everything you just said.
opposite of the American Army. Yeah, they kind of just drop you off in a village, and they're like, "Hey, don't start any wars while you're here." And I haven't heard of any coming out of Albania recently, so I'm keeping the mission alive, guys.
Albania is popping up all the time on the show as first it's become a bit of I wouldn't say underground, but it's becoming a digital nomad hotspot in some ways. And even before that, people were like, oh, this is a place you have to go before it gets over touristed, before people discover it. I mean, what are your thoughts? Because I'm not sure. Yeah, you can let everybody know what you were in the Peace Corps, but I'm curious to hear from you how much it's changed and what the vibe is like now compared to what it was before.
Yeah, it is changing constantly. I travel out of the country with some frequency every couple months. I have something that I'm off to, and I feel like every time I fly back in, they've put in a new wing on the airport, which used to just sort of be a box in a field, and now it's like 4 boxes in a field with like some hotels around it. So the boxes are multiplying, and people have certainly discovered that Albania is full of some pretty remarkable things. We've got great sea line, great mountains. It seems like everybody's sort of flocking to the south, and you're absolutely right. The digital nomad thing is certainly happening in the country. It's an interesting community, and I don't necessarily consider myself much of a digital nomad, because I really have been living almost exclusively in Albania for a long time. But it's such a mixed bag, especially with folks coming in from the States or wherever, where it's like people will be working in project management for technology, or creating a startup or something, and then you have this whole contingent of like life coaches and faith healers, and then it's like, what's happening here? How did you all get to this place specifically? In fact, I was in Cabo San Jose in Mexico a little while ago, and I think they were fairly sick of the digital nomad community, because somebody had spray painted on the wall, life coaches go home. Clearly, the locals of Cabo San Jose had enough of the life coaches. So yeah, it's a mixed bag, and I see them around a lot. I think the reason for folks coming to Albania specifically is, especially if you're from the States, there's a great sort of visa deal for you. You can stay visa free for a year. It's reasonably priced. It's beautiful. But I think one of the problems that I shake my fist at as the new children come onto my lawn is that it seems sometimes, at least in the online groups and in conversations, people care more about can I get drunk for cheaper than back home in Los Angeles, in Albania for a more beautiful place too. Instead of, hey, what's the culture like? What's the history of this area? Why are things the way they are? How do we interact with the locals? How do we contribute to the local economy? Instead, I feel like there's a thoroughly maintained bubble of expats that can kind of travel around, and it's like, well, if this was a wonderful place. Well, what did you like about the culture? It's like, oh, I barely interacted with it, which is a shame because Albania has a wonderful culture and some fascinating history. So I think that'll permeate soon, and the people who love it will stay and sort of become a part of the furniture.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, the geo arbitrage thing is, it's easy to look at it from a practical standpoint first. Everybody has their own individual situation, financial situation, everything. Of course, when it comes to taking a leap abroad, you're assessing, how it's going to impact your life, your business, and all that stuff. And so that's understandable. But yeah, your point that should be equally weighted with, hey, what's this culture like? Like, how can I perhaps contribute to it after a period of time? Which, granted, it's not an easy thing to just hop into a place and then ingratiate yourself quickly. It takes time.
You don't want to just like grab a random kid off the street and start reading a story to them. No culture in the world, from my understanding, is super stoked about that. But I think that I love this term, like geo arbitrage. It's a great term because it really is. It's something, it's an emergent property that really only could start now and was accelerated by things like COVID. So previously, it's like, well, why do you live where you live? It's like, oh, I grew up here. I've got family here. I've got friends here and works here. I moved to the city because a job was there. And cities developed around being this concentrated core of not only wealth and power, but also information. Previously, if you were going to go to, New York City, like the reason that you're going there is because there's this concentration of information and power and wealth that's there. It was geographically locked as best as it possibly could. But now, everybody's a Zoom call away, everybody's an email away or a tweet or whatever. And so because of that, I think it has people sort of questioning, well, why exactly do I live where I live? If I could live anywhere in the world, where would I live? And, we're not really sort of practiced, at least as an American, like we're not really practiced at going to another culture and being like, okay, well, now I'm the foreign one here. How do I make myself a part of a community here? Because we ourselves are a nation of immigrants who came in and sort of created the patchwork quilt of the U.S. So it's interesting to see how people attempt to integrate, and also how people sort of start to find a real affection for a place. Like Albania is one of these places where some people, as soon as they touch down, there's just like this mystical pull of it. People just absolutely adore it. My parents spend a lot of time here, and when they're walking around here, it's like they look 10 years younger, and just love the space. And there's no one thing that you can sort of put your finger on. It's like, oh, it must be the coffee, or must be the parks or the mountains or whatever. It's just something like it's just a connection that a lot of people have to it. The way some people sort of rhapsodize about, I don't know, Paris or London or whatever. And it's like, if you ask them, well, describe exactly what you love about Paris, to even describe it is to sort of kill the thing, right? It's like that joke about, if you ever have to explain a joke, it's like dissecting a frog. Certainly you understand the frog better, but you also killed the frog.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot to unpack here, but what you just said, I mean, we can go off that
Let's
last
move on
point.
to frogs.
No, yeah, let's move on to frogs. Yeah, we're going to talk about frogs now. No. Well, what you said, describing what you love about Paris, ultimately killing it, but isn't that the job of a travel writer, to describe the places you're visiting and sort of paint the picture? So
agreed. Yeah, it's like distilling, I think, because there's no way, in terms of my last book, right? Like, how do you give somebody the experience of spending 3 or 4 months in Erbil, in Iraqi Kurdistan. You can't really, but what you can do is you can sort of give them a good taste of what is so beguiling about the place itself. I think that part of the job of the travel writer is to just be a good imaginary companion for people, because oftentimes, I mean, I've certainly read travel books about places that I will never go, and I'd go pretty much anywhere, but like I'll probably never go to a lot of the places that I've read about. And so the job of the travel writer there is to give you the sensorial experience of being there, and that also sort of feeds into what the questions and what the answers that you experience in that place really are, right? Because it's like you can go to, I don't know, Paris and just have your croissant under the Eiffel Tower and maybe not think that much about it. But, I think the real interesting bit about traveling is it happens when you ask yourself like the third question, which is, well, why do I like this? And why is this here? Why is this tower here? Why is the city shaped like this? Why are blocks sort of radiating outward instead of on a grid system? And then that's kind of like the beginning of the rabbit hole. And then suddenly you realize that every city block in the world is uniquely connected to history and the human experience that everybody's sharing. So yeah, it's like that's not something you can distill into a couple paragraphs. But ideally, you can hopefully get somebody to want to walk down that street with you and turn the corner and find out what's next.
That was one of the things that made your book compelling, at least to me, and I'm sure to others listening, is as you described it, you're reading other books about places that you might not ever go, and then you're getting the opportunity to go there vicariously through the author. And for your book, I mean, that's I'm probably not going to any of those places. And I would say we can't put a scientific percentage on it, but you could probably say 98, 99% of the average travelers are probably not going to any of these places too. Yeah, that's why you're here, to tell some stories from these places and teach us about them.
And I should say that quite selfishly, I really chose to do a travel book just because I was like, well, it's just such a good excuse to be in a place, Like I had written 2 other books previously, so I wrote a science fiction book and a horror book before, and then really started wanting to be more of a journalist. And I was like, well, this is kind of a great, basically just an excuse to be in the room and to ask people questions that you would otherwise have no reason asking. To me, I think that like the missing segment of a lot of people's sort of imagination around travel is that it's going to be in a place that is momentarily nicer and or more relaxing and or more fun than their home, right? And then to go back home and be like, oh, well, that was nicer and more relaxing, more fun, and I grabbed a child and started reading a story to it, and we made peace and helped an old lady cross the road. But I think that there's another step that you can make, which is just looking at travel as a type of self-expression, which is like, the reason that you're going to a place is not to just see some old buildings or wander around a museum, which is also super fun. I love seeing old buildings and wandering around museums. But it's also to sort of answer a question that you specifically have. And you can organize a trip around answering a question. Years ago, I was traveling through, it was Lebanon, Kosovo, and Northern Ireland. And I realized that I had unwittingly made this trip that was consistently telling me the story over and over again about sectarian conflict. And then when you see something echoed in Lebanon that is also echoed in Northern Ireland, you see a similar phrase in Belfast that you see in Beirut, but it's in a different language. You're like, wow, they're there are these conversations that are going on all over the globe. And if you know how to listen to them, then you can pick up some really cool truths.
We'll get back to the interview in just a moment. I know you love earning travel rewards and cash back, and that's why you're going to love Rakuten. With Rakuten, you can earn cash back on everything you need to book your dream trip, hotels, flights, rental cars, experiences, and more, while still booking through your favorite travel sites. And don't worry, cash back can be earned on top of earning the credit card points and the hotel and airline loyalty points that matter most to you, depending on how you make your booking. Plus, with Rakuten, you can also earn cash back on groceries and other purchases like electronics, pet supplies, and more. And the best part, you can join today for free and start earning cash back on top of your travel rewards. Go to Rakuten.com or get the app. That's Rakuten, Rakuten. Rakuten, the most rewarding way to shop. Now, back to the show. Well, structuring a trip around a question, exactly what you did with this book, What is a Country, was the question. That's the crux of the book, essentially. Spending a year living in only unrecognized nations to answer that question. Because I know you had the role as an open source intelligence gatherer at a point before this. And part of the thing that you said in the book was part of this trip was learning to, quote, like the world again, because this work was so disturbing. I don't even know the adjective to use here. You'd probably give us some of the best adjectives for this. But I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that time in your life and sort of describe your relationship to travel or to the world as a whole before that, and kind of where you were after that experience.
Yeah, so it's funny that I mentioned that trip to Lebanon. That was my first trip to Lebanon, and sort of how I got introduced to the guy who would be my, for lack of a better term, my geopolitical forecasting mentor. He suggested that I go to Lebanon, and he sort of set up some interviews for me. So I'd go around and have various interviews with people. I didn't even quite understand why I was having interviews with people, but it got me sort of, I don't know, maybe like 40% of the way towards what I really wanted to be doing, because suddenly I had a reason to be in the room talking with, a political scientist or even at one point I was interviewing a Lebanese general, and it's like I had a reason to be there and to ask questions and to learn about something that I knew nothing about from somebody else's perspective. And I loved that. I thought that was fantastic. And so upon heading back to the States, I was like, yeah, I want to continue doing that kind of work. I want to continue sort of distilling information that I'm able to gather in the world, because I think everybody has like a set of things that they are naturally guided towards, or things that they find particularly interesting that nobody else in the world wants to do whatsoever. And it's like, if you like to do that thing and you're halfway decent at it, well, then that should be something that becomes a guiding principle for like what you do with yourself, right? And I'd come back from Lebanon or wherever, or Iraq, and somebody be like, well, God, why would you ever want to go to those places? It's like, why wouldn't you want to go to those places? They're fascinating. So I realized that was something that I at least had an affinity towards, which was learning about places in the world that people either had some antagonism towards or just had a good deal of misunderstanding towards. I was passionate about that. And I also noticed that the more I learned about them, the less sort of anxiety that I had about the general world as it was. Because, of course, everybody's living in the present right now. And so, you look at the news and it seems like we're all on a ticking time bomb ready to explode. But the world is a remarkably robust place. And the media is remarkably good at making us terrified. So when you put those two things together, like the logic doesn't necessarily logic out. But during my time when I was working in forecasting, And during training, you kind of have to saturate your brain with as much warfare knowledge as possible, and it's really, really granular knowledge to the point where you're sort of trying to figure out like where different geographies will affect certain belligerent forces. Can this country take over another country, or are there like electricity and LNG supplies too intertwined? Like it's super, super granular, and you get to the point that you've been reading about missiles all day, and shockingly, the only thing you can talk about are missiles because you've been reading about missiles all day. And also, nobody cares. Like, everybody's going about their day-to-day life where, you've been that like meme of Charlie Day and the yarn wall, and you're like, the Islamic State is going to do X, Y, and Z. And it's like the last thing anybody else is thinking about is what the Islamic State is up to. And so I realized that I'm sure some people were thinking about that, just not in the bars that I was hanging out at. So I realized that the more I was writing about this stuff and the more that I was reading about this stuff, the more I stopped to see the world as this place of sort of wonderment and adventure, and more I started to see it as a place that just sort of looked like a bloody chessboard. I didn't see Belarus as, a country with its own history and sort of hopes and dreams. I just saw it as a place of geopolitical imperative. I didn't see Myanmar as a place that I'd like to go to someday. I saw it as, a potential flashpoint between Eastern and Western dominance. And yeah, it's almost like going back to the frog thing, where it's like, yeah, maybe you understand conflict in the world better, but the world isn't just about conflict. And so as much as, obviously the media wants us to think that's often the case, that things are only, about to explode at all times. But there are people everywhere in the world having super normal days and just like buying eggs and, getting up for work and coming home from work and bullshitting with their friends. And to me, that was always the more interesting thing to think about and to write about. And I was like, what does a normal day look like in a country that doesn't exist? And what if I just lived in countries that don't exist for a year? Because I'd have, rack up quite a few normal days. And actually, just through the course of the book, there were very few.
Well, I guess that was part of the point too, to have few normal days.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, granted, I was very bored at some times. I was just like, at a certain point, you're in a like franchise restaurant in Transnistria having the same fish salad for the third day in the row, and you're like, this is not thrilling.
Well, it can't all be action packed, I guess, but yeah.
Great fish salad though.
Nice. Highly recommended.
Yeah, highly recommend it. Check out the La Placenta fish salad in Transnistria.
There you go.
If you're ever in the area.
Congratulations, Eric, for the most obscure travel recommendation ever announced on this podcast. Well done.
It's like the Moldovan Denny's, basically, because it's got like pictures on the menu and stuff like that. So just imagine Denny's, but like post-Soviet, and that's La Placenta.
Well, part of the book, when you were talking about this part of your life, when you said reading about missiles, and you were talking about watching this beheading over and over again, trying to figure out, what uniforms the officers were wearing and everything like that. And this was a very visceral example to me of the type of work that some people are doing out there, and just how, as you said, difficult that must be to sort of surround yourself with all of that, all of those entities, things that are going on in the world. Like, I mean, you're soaking that all in, and just because you transition to writing a book about something else or focus on the everyday life, those things are still there, right? And so you have this knowledge. And I wanted to tie this back into something you said in the foreword of the book, which I found interesting about the story of countries, saying countries are stories, they're illusions that lend necessary structure to the world. And you go on and say we must understand and choose which stories we believe and determine why. By doing this, we can see blind nationalism as the fever dream it is. And so relating that to countries, but also to, I wanted to hear a bit about the stories you tell yourself, because focusing away from all that stuff doesn't erase that it exists, right? So talk about those two parts of stories, I guess, if you want to say storytelling, but I think these stories we tell ourselves are just as important as the ones we interpret.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that, as I went through my year of living statelessly, and I have seen how nationalism plays out and how it directly sort of interacts with a person's own personal identity too. That's the point that you realize that how important these stories are, because they're a part of our everyday lived intellectual DNA, right? There's a philosopher, I think she's a philosopher. Yeah, I think that's technically what the term would be. Shoshana Zuboff, who wrote a wonderful book called Surveillance Capitalism. And so she talks about this idea of having a right to a future tense, that everybody in the world should, feels the best when they have a right to a future tense. And what this generally means is that everybody has this sort of assumption that moving forward from right now, from their present, they're going to be in a situation that is more sort of economically, personally, and socially stable. They have to have this idea, even if it's fictional, that the future is going to be a brighter place than it currently is. And when that becomes interrupted, when you see the evidence around you of things not going your way, and I put it in the book, talking about, going to the grocery store, and suddenly you realize that the price of groceries has doubled in the last week or whatever, and your money's worthless. Well, suddenly you have all of this evidence around you that things are not going particularly well. And so there's still this human need to have the future tense be a brighter place. And this becomes a really dangerous moment, because that's the point at which people will start to believe whatever narrative, no matter how fictional it might be, that their future is going to be a brighter place. And I think that you can see this, in the rise of dictatorships. You can see this in violent revolutions. You can see it in separatist and secessionist movements. Everybody is looking to plug their identity into this national identity, which is moving towards a brighter future in their understanding. And hopefully that, according to them, aligns with their values. And so that, to me, is one of the really interesting ones. It's one of the more interesting mechanisms of kind of how those personal stories interact with the national story. Because we need to interoperate together. And a national story is such an astoundingly elegant piece of ideological technology that basically lets you say, I don't know these. I mean, I'm from the States. I don't know these, almost 300 million people. I don't know these 300 million people at all. I who knows? Maybe I know like 200 of them or whatever. But I will contribute resources to their thriving. I will vote in a way that I think all of us will collectively be better. I will compete and argue against them if I don't think that their ideas are going to lead to that thriving. And that's the magic of storytelling around a nation state, is if we can believe just enough of that is the same as millions of strangers, we can work together. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, it's not a small thing to talk about. I mean, you could look at a million different studies on oh gosh, I'm blanking out on the word. When you get a pill that's not the actual medicine,
Oh, placebo. Yeah.
like a placebo studies, things like that. The things that people's belief. And I mean, what you were describing, this idea of believing in the future tense, is a huge chunk of that. I was thinking is about maintaining your own mental health as an individual, right? You're like, I need to be around this positive thinking, and listen, whether you believe that somebody's positive, maybe one person's positive thinking is another person's conspiracy theorist nut job, but for them, that's the thing that they need to have that future tense belief, which is where this intersection is taking place. I mean, it is incredibly fascinating and complicated.
Well, and also sort of like, people need to be surrounded by the evidence of their reality that is harmonious with their internal life too. Obviously, I don't know if you know this, but human beings have like a fantastic capacity for self-delusion, but it only goes so far. Like you sort of need to be surrounded by the evidence of continuity with your beliefs and with how you perceive the world as working. And so as a part of that, like, we're all sort of consensus reality generating machines. And when you're in a culture, I mean, this kind of goes back to the expat thing too. When you're in a culture, you suddenly have this other code switch that you've just performed on yourself. And there's a new consensus around you. And then you have to realize, okay, well, how much of this harmonizes with what was back home? How much of this is able to confirm or deny the beliefs that I had previously? And that's a really exciting part about travel, because that's the point that you realize like how alike we actually are,
Yeah. Also, when you're living abroad for an extended period of time, like you live in Albania, that's your home. I live in Norway, and just going through that process of that you just described, it's one thing to code switch, we'll use that term, for a couple weeks because you're in Tulum and you're going to experiment with the identity of being a life coach
and
or
you're
whatever.
Start slacklining.
Whatever the case is, but it's another thing when you're confronted with that on a daily basis. And I have found, I mean, to try to put words to it, which is our job here on a podcast, but it's difficult. That might have been over a period of months or years, a combination of, I'm going to, I'm just speaking from my personal experience. I'm going to curate, this cultural concept because it's beneficial and it's aligned with, friluftsliv is the Norwegian concept of having like getting outside every day and having like the fresh air life. Okay, I know that like that speaks to me. I connect with nature. It makes me more creative. It calms me down. I'm going to embrace that one. I'm going to curate that one. I'm going to embrace it into my life and become Norwegian in that way. Oh, now, wait a minute. Hold on. You're trying to get me to watch this, soccer game or whatever. I mean, I like soccer, but just as an example, now I'm going to protect my American identity because I don't want to lose, all of my Americanness. I want to maintain, like, I'm going to make some buffalo wings tonight and we're going to have blue cheese dip and like, this is happening. You know what I mean? So it's like, like this constant sort of, and then, after a while, I think, at least when you kind of realize all of this stuff is so malleable, and that intellectually, well, these were a product of our, birth and some of the things we inherited, but also our culture, is a huge part of that. And you take yourself out of that, and then things break down, and you start to see how in flux a lot of this stuff can be when you're really open to it.
And also, like, I think that one of the neat things too about culture, and I think that people have now, and maybe it's more of a stateside thing, but like people treat culture like with kid gloves now. Like it's this Fabergé egg that's going to break if you mishandle it, and it's like, well, the purpose of culture is essentially to be this robust set of actions and beliefs and norms that not only protect the sort of like interior life of a group of people who are largely aligned, but it's also for interacting with the outside world. It's for letting people into your culture. It's for adapting, and it's also for negotiating with the outside world. In the U.S., we have such a culture of independence, and I think one of the things that I notice more than anything when I'm out and about in the world is how I have this sort of like cultural like knee-jerk reaction for like equality, right? Like I spend time in the UK, and people are talking about and like classism is so ingrained in the society there. You see people with their little like family crests on their pinky rings, and you see people who are sort of gently slipping in like where they went to school, and I just think all of these sort of social tells of like what class somebody is in is kind of goofy, like, because it doesn't matter. I don't give a shit about your ring. Like, and so I don't know, you probably have the same thing, but are you ever surprised about like where you find that speed bump between you're interacting with some other culture and really enjoying like the how the concepts sort of play off of your own culture, but then you get some speed bump and you're like, whoa, I don't believe that at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, let's all be relaxed, but please show up on time. I've been waiting for 20 minutes here,
Oh yeah,
or whatever the I mean, as a practical example.
Terminal earliness, definitely an American quality too. I've heard the Germans are great at that too.
We'll get back to the interview in just a moment. Now, back to the show. Are there some cultural concepts that you really resonate with that you came across either during the traveling and making of this book, or just in Albania? Are there certain things that you've really kind of adopted that have maybe somehow improved your life?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think, especially living in Albania is a much more communal culture than America is. I should say the U.S. is. And I should even dial down into that a bit more, which is because I'm from Los Angeles, and I know that there are smaller communities. I was doing Peace Corps service with a guy who was from a smaller town in Illinois than he moved to in Peace Corps. So he moved.
Okay.
It was like a town of 500, and he moved to a town of 1,000. So, but a lot of what living in an Albanian village to him looked totally normal. It's just like, oh yeah, this is sort of village life, and me coming from Los Angeles, totally different. I think there is this sort of like instantiation in the culture of like, well, you don't have friends, you have business contacts. Everybody is somehow jockeying for some position in the entertainment industry or somehow, and if they're not helping you out, well, they're in your way. I don't know what this
they're worthless.
Los Angeles voice is. Yeah, exactly. And then it's like you spend one very rough winter in Tropoia, Albania, and you realize the most important person to you and the most important conversation in your day is just bullshitting with your grocer about whatever's funny that day, because you've just been staring out at the snow for weeks on end.
And it's so meaningful,
Totally, yeah, and just valuing the human beings around you as a sort of part of your community, rather than just people who are either helping you get where you're going or just distractions.
Yeah, we have to figure out that LA voice. It's not the New York 1930s, like, you're gonna get him a job. See, you're gonna. I don't know. Did everybody actually?
Honestly,
talk
I wish I knew that guy. I've always wanted to do some sort of caper with that guy specifically.
He's got a monocle somewhere in his.
Goddamn right. Pocket. Yeah, I think Arab culture too is also pretty spectacular for this. Like, Arab culture I use very, very broadly there, and I should probably dial down a bit. So let's just say like the Middle Eastern culture of the Levant. I spent time in northern Iraq, Lebanon, Turkey, all very, very different places culturally. I think people don't realize how diverse the Middle East is. I when I was living in Iraqi Kurdistan, I was in Erbil in a place called Ankawa, which is like the Assyrian neighborhood. And I realized I said hello to people in 4 different languages in the same day. And it was like, my grocer he was Assyrian. So I learned whatever Assyrian for hello was. And then the guy working at my gym was Hindi, or he's he was in India. And then, I had Arab students, and then I had a Kurdish friend. And it's like every single block is somebody different. It's such a multiplicity of cultures. But in that larger Middle Eastern sphere, it seems like there's such a priority on spending time with others, not for any purpose. Sitting there having tea for hours on end, meeting up, not to discuss any business or anything like that, but just to kind of hang out and be with somebody. And I was just astounded at how much respect and care, especially some of the Arab folks that I met, had for an outsider who, frankly, they have no reason to like. I wasn't the one who decided to invade their country, but I could understand them being a little bit less gracious to an American, and that was not something that I experienced at all. I thought everybody was so incredibly kind and gracious and understanding. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. That connection you described, just the genuine, hey, let's just chat and see what's up, no agenda type of thing, really should. I mean, when that is the norm rather than the exception, then I feel like that can be part of living your best life in many ways.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a bit uncomfortable too as an American, where you're like, we are going to this place to do this thing. No, we're just like hanging out, and we're just going to sit here and drink tea and like look at the road and talk about whatever is on the road. And that's what we're doing. And it's like, but what's the KPI? Like, what's the result that we're after? How do we know if we won?
Yeah, I mean, this is a great example of breaking free of the mindset that's so ingrained that you have to kind of shake free from it to have. Well, you don't have to, but it certainly helps. I think these types of interactions, and that example is those all work towards breaking down a cultural idea that maybe is just, when it comes down to it, is just an idea, right? Like that we need to be productive. Let's use it in air quotes, like constantly being productive.
I think there's also something that's like, I find really, like, I find it reverse culture shocking, I should say, when I go back to the States. And so in Albania, I have maybe like 4 friends who know like exactly what I do for work. Which is like, I work in media and communications for technology companies. And the rest of my friends have no idea what I do and have never really even asked and like don't care. And I think that's awesome. But like one of the first things that you talk about when you first meet somebody in the States is like, oh, well, what do you do? And then if you have some like industry specific knowledge, then it's like, oh yeah, well, something, I kind of understand that. I think the dystopian future that we're heading for in the States is that like every conversation will just look like a conversation on Slack. And I hope that doesn't happen, where it's just like, oh yeah, you project manager also, like, there are potentially more important things to interact with each other over than like what we do for work and sort of trotting out whatever the cultural meaning of that thing is. Like I'm a huge proponent of small talk. You'll see that in people's like profiles and stuff like that. It's like, I don't do small talk. I don't care about the weather. It's like, but it's not about the weather. It's just about like casually connecting with somebody over a shared experience. Like whether it's raining or not doesn't actually matter that much. And also, who can have a conversation where you're, diving into the marrow of the universe like every second of the day? Jesus Christ. Maybe in Tulum.
Yeah. I am going to circle back to some questions around the future of nation states and some of the things tied in with some of the things
I've been reading about that a lot lately. I'm prepared.
Well, let's get some book recommendations towards the back end too, and some other resources. Don't let me forget to do that.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, as you're coming into this project, and of course this happened between July 2017 and September 2018 is when you did all this traveling, and then you wrote the book after. And that was another shocking story to me as I came to the end of the book and read about how this book actually came to see the light of day. I know that's a weird place to start at the end of the book, but the book wouldn't be out if this whole experience hadn't happened to you. And this sounds quite frankly, this sounds like a very traumatic experience. Are you comfortable talking about what happened in South Africa and how that brought the book to life?
Yeah, certainly. And it's funny, I was thinking about that yesterday. And I was thinking about a conversation that I had with a friend of mine here in Albania. And I'm very glad that I included that as the last chapter. But it was just because of an Albanian friend encouraging me to put that in there. She was like, you actually have to include it. And I was like 5-10% that I would include it. And then I realized,
what were you debating about that because from a content perspective, or because like, oh, if I include this is a traumatic event in my life and then I have to talk about it and I don't know if I want to, what was the reason? Yeah.
Oh, well, I think the top line version of it was what you were just talking about. Like, part of me was convincing myself like, oh, that's just not necessary to go in there. But I think what was really the case was I didn't really want to relive the experience and sort of crystallize it into words. But now having done that, it's funny. I mean, this is always kind of the way writing has worked in my life, is like by, I don't know, trapping the feeling or the experience in words on the page, suddenly it does lose its power a lot. Like I don't, so for the folks at home, I'll give the brief explainer of it. So in, I guess it was 2021, I was attacked violently in South Africa. I was hiking near Table Mountain, and a mugger came out and of some bushes, and he struck me across the head. It's sort of back in my hair. Struck me across the head with a knife. And I went running away from him. But given the fact that I was running and screaming down a mountain, gravity being what it is, it was very difficult to keep doing that. So I ended up falling and rolling down the mountain a little bit. And I figured that would be kind of the end of it. I had heard that South Africa and Cape Town in particular was a dangerous place. And aside from the fact that it's a really wonderful place, it does have problems with this kind of thing. So somebody had said, if you run away and you make enough noise, like the mugger will go away or something like that. And I looked up, and I mean, my glasses were off at the time because I just rolled partway down a mountain, which is just the worst situation to be in, because not only am I potentially going to have to defend myself, but I'm also blind at this point. And at this point, I didn't realize that he had that I was bleeding so badly that he had struck me with a knife. It didn't feel like a knife hit at the time, though. Again, I have never been stabbed in the head before, so I wouldn't know what that felt like previously. So he came down to where I was sort of like a turtle on my back, and it was at this point that this guy was coming towards me with this knife that I think I kind of had that moment of clarity that they talk about. Not necessarily like your life flashing before your eyes or anything like that, but time sort of turning into taffy and slowing down, and you're considering a lot of things all at once. And one of the things that I started considering was the fact that I've had a lot of close calls while traveling in some of these more difficult areas in the world. But I always had a reasonable suspicion that I was going to get out of it. I felt like I could, move the situation in a way that was going to be more beneficial to me or safer. But when a guy is coming towards you with a knife in his hand and you're blind and upturned on your back on a mountain, it's like this isn't looking good. And I was immediately thinking about any regrets that I had. And I realized I didn't have many, which is, I think, kind of a good thing. But the one that was the most important to me that I felt it was just sort of a disgrace was that I never actually finished and published this book, You Are Not Here. And the reason that it never happened was, I had done this book as my dissertation from my master's degree at Oxford. And, I ran it around to all the, hot publishers and agents in London and various places. And basically everybody just sort of told me, no, thanks. What else have you got? And I foolishly thought to myself, well, just because it's not worth anything to the publishing establishment, that it must not be worthy to be read by other people. And then more importantly than that, more foolishly than that, I started thinking, well, maybe it's just not even worth saying. Until that moment when this gentleman's coming towards me with a knife, and I think I'm about to die. And I realized that I regretted so deeply that this book never got finished, because I was maybe like 99% of the way there. As 2 or 3 months worth of work to actually get it on its feet. And I had just thrown it in the back of the drawer because I figured nobody cared. And I realized that I cared about having this story told, and that the work is worthy and important. And so what ended up happening was I should say, I've not been in many physical altercations before, and I think I just got lucky in this one. No, I just got lucky in this one. My attacker, he, was like, give me your stuff. And I was like, okay, I'll give you my stuff. You need to help me find my glasses first, because I can't even find my stuff and I can't see anything. And he's like, where are they? And then he sort of like dropped his knife a little bit when he was looking down at my glasses. I saw the glasses on the, no, I didn't. He was looking at where I was looking down towards where I thought my glasses were. Sadly, I had to say goodbye to those glasses. But as he looked down, I was like, oh, well, he's dropping the knife at this point. So I said, oh, my glasses are down there. And they weren't. And as he bent down, I just kicked him very squarely in the face. And then we fought each other for the knife for a bit.
Oh my gosh.
And
I mean, that is like a life and death fight.
It certainly was. And at this point it was, I don't know how graphic you want me to be, but at this point, I had gotten on top of him and was getting the knife away from him. And it was at that point that I realized I was bleeding heavily from my head, from where the knife had hit me. So it was up until this point that I didn't realize I had been bleeding this entire time. And so eventually, his hand had been injured. I was freaking out because I'm bleeding from the head and I have no idea how bad it is. So like, I've got to get out of there. So we kind of were like, okay, well, we're done here, and I'm going to go and take my my backpack and get out of here. And so I sort of ran down the rest of the hill. I was actually quite close to a residential neighborhood. Got down the hill into a neighborhood, maybe 2 minutes away. And then I just ruined some poor South African man's very pleasant afternoon, because not only am I blind, but I'm also covered in blood. And he's like out there washing his car, and there's like no good way to be covered in blood and blind and say, hey, don't worry about me. I just have a question and need help. It's, nobody's ever stoked that the dude covered in blood just showed up. So he was a bit skeptical of me and my presence, and, fair play. I was just like, look, I just got attacked. And he's like, where? I'm like, oh, literally, you can see my attacker. Like, he's going away right now. And he's like, okay, well, like, I'll give you some towels and you can clean up. And so got myself cleaned up, and he pointed me towards the police station, but I was blind. So I was like, I'm just walking down a street holding my head. And fortunately, some old English hikers were in the area. And I was like, you may not want to go hiking today. It's, there's thieves about. And so they took me to the police station, and rest was history.
Yeah. Wow, that is so sorry that happened. That's terrible.
I'm actually not at this point. I'm so happy that this book got out, and I think that I understand the sort of depths of that depravity, but like, I hope that it was, if nothing else, it was a very clear lesson to me, and maybe others, can take the lesson a little bit earlier on and not need to get, violently attacked to realize that, like, whatever weird story you have that you want to write, the masterpiece that you want to create, whatever bizarre vision, like, you specifically think is important in the world, like, just go and do it, and don't wait till somebody brings you to a near-death experience to think that it's worthy of recognition or even being made in the world. So yeah, I mean, since that, I've definitely tried to leave, nothing left over in my creative or personal life.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciated that you shared it, especially with the sort of call to action focused on the reader, just saying, hey, whatever, like what you just said, that sentiment, whatever you want to put out into the world, just basically let it fly and go for it. And I thought that was pretty courageous to share such a personal, traumatic story with the intention of encouraging other people to give themselves permission to put the thing out there, whatever that is to them. I mean, I guess part of that too is not just the book itself, but also, and maybe I'm speculating, but is it, you said this book is worthy of publication, but it's tied in with like, hey, I'm worthy of putting this out there, and I am an author, and it's tied in with yourself too, I would imagine.
Yeah, massively.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's also something that I think every author who is writing about, from distinctly their perspective, has to struggle with, which is just like, this book is part travelogue, it's part memoir, it's part like geopolitics, like, it's a weird book, and there's no amount of literary flourishes or magic tricks that I could do to not say, this is me writing about me from my perspective. And that's a pretty scary thing to do, because like, at that point, with my previous work, it's like a lot of fiction. And, if you're writing a story about like robot orgies, maybe you have like one or two things in there where you're like, man, I really do think that about love. Granted, that's not I should have chosen a different way of talking about that.
Darn, you ruined my follow-up question.
About robot orgies?
Yeah.
Go check out my book, Eternal LA, full of robot orgies. But like, you get like one or two, maybe a paragraph of what you actually think And like, but it's couched in fiction. It's couched in a character that isn't you. But then when you're writing from your perspective, you're just like, damn, this is what I think, and I literally sign my name on to what I think. And then worse than that, you hand somebody 400 pages of text or whatever, and it's like, hey, you know what you should do? Spend 12 hours reading my thoughts. That's what you should do.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
like
I hadn't thought of it that way.
It's a big lift emotionally, and so you do. The money certainly isn't going to get people through the process of writing a book. Nobody writes books for the money. But the fact that you're able to sort of crystallize what you uniquely think, the fact that you're able to have the courage to go through a process that is on the best days revelatory, and on the worst days soul crushingly boring and hard to do, then you will be changed on the other side of creating something.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that. And we should, of course, talk a bit about these non-entities, if you will, these unrecognized nations, whatever you want to call them, stateless nations, micronations. I mean, basically, this is anything outside of the 193 UN member states.
Is it 193 now? Sounds right. Yeah.
I think so.
I feel like people often email me about new countries. So yes, 193 sounds good.
Yeah, I mean, there are like the sort of, like the slow Jamistan is like some DJ in the California desert, but some of these are more, I mean, you think about Iraqi Kurdistan, and that's more of, I mean, you're the geopolitical expert, not me, but I'm guessing that's more of like a separatist type of thing. I can almost like get my head around that more. Yeah, like a secessionist thing. Then, like, I went onto Lieberland's website to prep for this interview, and it's like this 7-kilometer patch of land between, was it Kosovo and Croatia and Serbia?
Between Croatia and Serbia, so it's like northern Serbia.
Yeah, it's just like this, seems like this bizarre concept that, is it, even real? Like, how are they doing this? Because doesn't somebody own this land? And so, I mean, there's all these, this is what, I guess, why you wanted to go down this rabbit hole. It's like, this is the rabbit hole I want to go down. I'm interested in learning about this, you as a geopolitical expert, and coming off of what you were doing with the work. And that's another part of this that I found pretty interesting, because you were doing this open source intelligence type of work, and then you transitioned to this. And the obvious thing to think is, and you say this in the beginning of the book, like the sort of the dangers involved in this project, and that, one person's burgeoning nation state is oftentimes another's rogue den of terrorists. I'm using quotes there. That was like a sentence you put in the foreword. And so you're going into this potential den of terrorists or burgeoning nation state, whatever your perspective is. And you're also going into it from being somebody who just worked in intelligence. So that can, I mean, I don't know, I mean, you're not going to tell us here if you were really a spy or not, some like double covert spy, or maybe you will, I don't know. I know, some of the conversations you had in the beginning, you're like, I'm a third grade teacher. And they're like, oh yeah, so you're a spy. Okay. Get it.
Yeah, this is a pretty common conversation I have with people in various foreign countries. And I think also a lot of that is, part of it is due to obviously wariness about Americans and whatever they're up to in your country, but also part of it is like, I think some people look at their spot on the map as a place where it's like, why would somebody want to come and experience this place? And it's like, when your home is the water that you swim in, then it becomes very difficult to understand like why anybody would want to come there and experience it. Like, I remember as a kid, finding out that there were hotels in like Redondo Beach, California, which is where my family's from. And I was baffled that there were hotels there, because I'm like, you go somewhere else and you stay in a hotel. Like, home is here. So like, why would we need hotels here? Like, it just didn't make sense that people would just like come briefly for a period of time. So yeah, and I mean, that's the whole idea of the burgeoning nation state versus like it being a terrorist insurrection. This is something that like history is constantly having this conversation with itself about, and ultimately it's just about how power moves and how I think the geopolitical term is consent is generated, right? So statecraft as a thing is just the art of generating consent amongst the governed. Obviously, there's many different ways to do that, but throughout the laboratory of the world, we've figured out a lot of different ways. At least in the West, we talk about like how democracy is like this optimizing way to get everybody to have buy-in and create a society that works for everybody. We'll see. Everything's up for debate, and the ultimate test is just whether it hangs out throughout an extended period of time. But in between the sort of framework of nation states that we know, what if you spin a globe and look at all of those lines that have been drawn, there are a lot of places which see themselves as independent nations. And I think at this point I want to like sort of, this has been like the new thing that I've been putting it to myself as I explore the future of nation states for my new book, is if the way at least I'm breaking it down is with a nation state, the nation is something you can't blow up and the state is something you can blow up. Let me dial down a little bit. So the nation's the story, the state is the municipal infrastructure, right? The state can go away. It's the power of the state, the police, the army, the firefighters, all of those things can sort of fall away. They can crumble. We can have the existence of a failed state. However, the nation is something that is so incredibly difficult to make go away from the earth because it's a shared story and it's a shared affinity between people. One of the questions I ask myself all the time is like, okay, if, the United States sinks into the ocean tomorrow, there is no United States. Like, well, what am I? I would be like, well, I'm American still. I come from the United States. And it's like, well, the state has gone in this thought experiment, but the nation is still there. I would still meet people who would call themselves American. And maybe I'd even have more of a close affinity with them because we are interoperating in an exercise of shared memory. And so that nation has not gone away. So now when we take this and we think about like, well, what about all these places that don't exist on any map? We're talking about the state, right? We're talking about the recognized infrastructure of a place. And part of that, probably the most important part of that, is just getting some dang borders. And as it turns out, drawing lines on maps is really hard to do. And it usually costs an enormous amount of blood, an enormous amount of treasure, an enormous amount of transnational consent, which is usually generated by the exchange of blood and treasure also. Of course, there are times in history where these borders become more malleable, where new lines are being drawn. But let's say in the case of Kurdistan or Iraqi Kurdistan, where I was living, the idea of Kurdistan, the nation of Kurdistan, is this large area with 35 million, 40 million people within a contiguous area that would recognize themselves as Kurdish. Granted, within those areas, there are different states that are operating with one another. You have the Kurdistan regional government in northern Iraq. You've got I think it's like the autonomous area of northeastern Syria. Sometimes it's called Rojava. I think there's some difference between those two, but I'm not an expert in that area at all. I didn't go to that area. But these are two areas that maybe somebody would call like, well, that's Kurdistan, but really the state infrastructure is entirely different between these two. And there's also languages that they speak, which are Kurdish, but they are not the same language and they're not interoperable with one another. So as I started, just dialing into that, and a lot of my work previously, while I was basically a trainee open source intelligence person for those couple months, I spent a lot of time looking at the Islamic State and Iraqi Kurdistan. And so, there's this sort of moment of, if it wasn't so heartbreaking and traumatic, it would be, funny and ironic. But you have this moment where you have the Islamic State that's rushing across from Syria into Iraq, trying to gobble up as much land as possible so they can create their caliphate. And meanwhile, you've got the Kurdish region attempting to gain independence after years and years and years of international wrangling and trying to gain support and even fighting violent conflict with regional member states. And they're fighting over the same piece of desert, and what they're fighting for isn't just about drawing that line, but it really is about drawing that line. Both want independence, both want sovereignty, both want autonomy. And they're going about it in two vastly different ways. From the side of the Islamic State, they're, murdering their way across a desert. From the side of, and then, installing autocratic rule in major city centers. From the side of the area of Iraqi Kurdistan, they're working through ostensible democratic processes to have a referendum vote on whether or not they can be permitted to have sovereignty. These are two vastly different ways of making a country, and yet there they are fighting each other in the same desert full of ideology and oil and international interests. There are boring days all the time, but sometimes history is all happening at once.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're right. You're putting yourself in the middle of it. I guess that was the point, but it seems like the obvious question, but why did you feel the need to bear witness to history in the making in this way, this type of history, and this nation seeking sovereignty and, the violence associated with that? And
yeah, I've had this question a couple of times, and I haven't ever come up with a better answer for it. And maybe it's because I don't necessarily know the answer myself, or just haven't really figured it out. But to me, it was the most interesting possible thing I could do with my time and limited amount of life on this earth at that moment. I was
that's a great way to describe it. I mean,
people
I don't know, maybe take that phrase and run with it, and do their version of that.
I mean, the dumb version is it's neat. That's really fucking cool.
Yeah.
I just thought that, oh yeah, you went to, Cabo San Lucas and got braids in your hair. I just saw a country being made. Not that it's competitive, but it is.
Well, like you said, you are from LA. You are from LA, so
there are certain things culturally that will never die in me.
No, I mean, that makes a lot of sense, actually. I mean, at least within the context of this show, somebody.
Yeah, right. I think, and it's funny too. When you talk to people, sort of for two different reasons, I think that people tell me about. A lot of their sort of aspirations. A lot as a writer, people oftentimes are oh, I've always wanted to write a book. And as a traveler, people are oh, I've always wanted to go to X, Y, and Z. And, that thing is usually followed by, but I won't because, and then and I think that when people are not practiced in just doing their weird little thing, they find every reason not to do their weird little thing, because it seems too overbearing or expensive or important. And a lot of what I encourage folks to do is just it's it might not be that big of a deal. Just go and see where it takes you. And for me, I taught English abroad before. I needed a new job because I'd gotten fired from being in intelligence. It just seemed like I was on a treadmill in LA, an actual treadmill, not a philosophical one or a metaphorical one. But I was on a treadmill and I was thinking like, well, if somebody gave me a ticket right now to Iraqi Kurdistan and said, you can stay there for the next 3 months and it's free, like, would I go? I'd be like, absolutely. I'm like, well, I'll do one better and say you have a job there too.
Right.
And I realized that's not something that like everybody in that gym in Los Angeles was thinking. Like, if you made that offer to anybody else, they'd probably be like, I don't want to go to northern Iraq, like 45 minutes away from ISIS's stronghold.
Yeah. Now I'm getting the camera pans across the treadmills and you can hear everybody's thought. And person one's like, I wonder what cocktail I'm going to get tonight. And person two is like, where are we going to brunch tomorrow? And person three is like, how do I get to Iraqi Kurdistan?
Yeah. And it's like,
it's like, all right, well, the camera's got to stop there.
Right. Like at a certain point, you're like, oh, I have a peculiar set of interests. And it might be worth running down those peculiar sets of interests because if nothing else, I'll think it was fun. And it was fun at the same time as it was, difficult and scary and sometimes heartbreaking.
Well, I think it's amazing, man. I mean, just, it's one thing to have the self-knowledge of, I have these peculiar interests or these, strange, we call them strange desires by societal standards, a strange desire to live in Iraqi Kurdistan, but to just embrace that and then actually do it is a big deal, man. I mean, kudos, and write a book about it and everything. And it's just like, I mean, we're always encouraging people to embrace their strange desires on this show.
Yeah.
So, this is just your story reinforces
that. It's really
cool. But
totally.
The other thing is you're getting, we've been joking about the life coaches and stuff, but it's no offense to the life coaches, by the way. We love them.
Shout out to the life coaches.
I've been a business coach, but it's like, when you go to certain places, if you're going to a Tulum or something like that might be the subset of expat culture you're exposed to, right? Or you go to Mexico and perhaps you end up near a retiree type of community and then you're kind of exposed to that subset. But whereas when you go to these countries, you're meeting different kind of characters, which also, in some places, I guess, can repeat themselves. Like you might have there were some of the people that like ran journalists to the front lines and that's how it would get paid. There were soldiers who disarmed bombs. Or fixers, NGO employees. You have people that are, educational services at international schools. I mean, this is, from my understanding, in these types of countries or non-countries, we should say, there is this subset of subset of expats, let's call them, which is the international community. But it looks much different than like the international community might look in like a Mexican retirement village or something. So what were the types of people who were the types of people that you would meet? I've got the locals, but also within this community. And, just what did you learn from those? What were some of the takeaway lessons you've learned from just being around that environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, well, first of all, I love, the community that ends up forming around places like, Hargeisa, Somaliland, or, the hotel in Erbil that I was hanging out at. You meet really fascinating people, and everybody is in a place for you don't just end up at the Ambassador Hotel in Hargeisa, Somaliland. Like, you're there for a reason. And if you've come to the literal ends of the earth, your reason is probably pretty good. And when people are deciding to sort of like endure some kind of hardship to get to a difficult place to travel to and difficult place to live in, I think that there's like this positive correlation to how cool their stories are going to be and how interesting, they are. But granted, you're also, you're looking at a community oftentimes on the edge of conflict or on the edge of humanitarian crisis that may not be working for the good guys. So like there's always, I think the stereotype is like the quiet American. I'm the opposite of the quiet American. I'm fairly loud and verbose. But I am American. But you'll see folks that are security contractors, and they clearly don't want to be spoken with, and fair enough. But you'll see people who are, I call them, I don't know if it's like a common term, but sort of cowboy capitalists. They're coming into areas of humanitarian crisis, and they're trying to set up businesses in that area. One of the ways that this plays out a lot is somebody coming in as a land developer and buying up a bunch of land that just went through some crisis. Obviously not the most morally black and white situation, but it's definitely something that occurs in the world. And I think that when you're in a bar with aid workers, with journalists, with these cowboy capitalists, with soldiers, the things that you end up talking about are not only like totally like mundane for the situation that you're in. It's like, well, can I get safely from here to there? Is it possible to get extracted from this area if there's something that goes wrong? Do you know if the roads are open at this point? But it's also just sort of like commonplace. I mean, the same way that people in Tulum might talk about like fire dancing or whatever. I'm really picking on Tulum. Or people in let's say the Albanian coastline, might talk about like wherever the next place to go hit the beach is. In these communities, you're talking about the things that are most relevant to you and to what you're specifically attempting to do. I've always found that people have been quite open to chat with me about whatever they're up to. Obviously, I interviewed some security contractors in the book. I spoke with some fixers, aid workers, and I think Hans, my favorite aid worker, who is working on like an agricultural project in Somaliland. And so everybody's there in difficult circumstances trying to do difficult and unusual things. These are the best bars in the world. They're the best coffee shops in the world because everybody's there for some fascinating reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I was getting at with this question. Just this, it's attracting a certain. Well, I'm not trying to make a broad stroke here, but you're attracting a certain type of. It's a certain types of people.
Fucking weirdos.
And,
just a bunch of weirdos in a room, man.
Well, I mean, interesting stories, like you said, motivations to come into a place like this, and so.
Like I was sitting at the hotel that I was hanging out at in Hargeisa, and this soldier walked in the room. People of my complexion, Caucasian people, stand out a lot in Somalia, and he was. And so he walked in the room, and he just looked in really rough shape. It was only me and him in the coffee shop, and we, I think, both caught each other's eye and mutually agreed that we would not speak to one another. And so we just like had silent coffee, maybe 10 yards away from each other, just sort of like not looking at each other in a totally empty room. And then a moment later, a random American guy came in, and and he ended up, I don't remember if he made it into the book, anyway, yeah, he was setting up businesses in Somaliland, and then suddenly it's like, what? How are you setting up businesses in Somaliland? And then you hear like little side quests of like I heard about some guy who was running around Hargeisa, and he was trying to make Somaliland into like a sort of mesquite briquette exporting hub, because the mesquite bush is an invasive species in South Africa. And he was trying to figure out this way of like training people to like chop down the mesquite bushes and then turn them into charcoal briquettes. And then suddenly, like, you have Texas barbecue that's somehow helping out Hargeisa, Somaliland. I never met mesquite briquette guy, but I really wanted to.
Here, let me ask you about the locals. Had you run across anybody who kind of questioned, like, well, what, let's say somebody's dream was to get out of a violent situation, into a more stable, I'm thinking about coming from LA here, and their sort of take on what are you doing here? Like, we would just dream of being, by the ocean in Los Angeles, and you're, did you have any interactions like that?
Oh yeah, constantly. I mean, I get that in Albania all the time. And I mean, given that I was writing about unrecognized nations, and I was living in unrecognized nations that had either sort of active or passive independence movements that were ongoing, people were quite forthcoming about me being there and what they felt like the future of their nation was. And I think the reason for that was because they saw the potential for me to sort of boost the signal of what it was like to struggle for independence and for recognition on a globe that already had everything spoken for. It's very, very rare that somebody is antagonistic to me due to where I come from or being suspicious of me. I mean, it does happen, and I've been banned from entering Turkey because they think that I'm an unsavory character, and it was just because I wrote this book about that contains quite a bit of talk about Iraqi Kurdistan and Kurdish independence. And I have a pretty hard and fast rule about how I'll never lie about where I'm from. I think this is actually one of my biggest pet peeves about Americans who go traveling, which is, they'll say, well, don't they all hate us here? And it's like, okay, first of all, that's like a wild generalization about a whole nation of people, and secondly, it's also fairly it's fairly egotistical to say that, like, yeah, this entire nation, like, most of what they do all day is just like wait till some American comes around, just so they
just
can
sitting around thinking about you all the time. Right?
They're gonna make your coffee take a long time to get there because they hate our politics. Like, that is ridiculous. And so I never, and also, if you're traveling and, you're not a jerk, and you're planning on having good experiences and making connections with the folks around you, then, like, we want the cool Americans to go out and be cool Americans and not to say that they're from Canada. Like, we need all the help we can get. Don't let the first time that somebody becomes cognizant of the United States be at the end of a bomb. Like, that's unfortunately how a good deal of the world thinks of us. And so I would much rather, some groovy backpacker introduce them to American culture rather than our armed forces. But anyway, I've only ever once lied about where I'm from. And that was I was in Hargeisa, Somaliland. And this gentleman was chasing after me, just sort of like yelling, where are you from? Where are you from? Obviously, I don't look like a Somali local. So he was getting more and more antagonistic. It was also in a fairly open market area, and that can be a good thing, or it can be a very bad thing, just depending on how the locals sort of view you. Because sometimes it's nice to have other people around who are gonna, tell the guy to buzz off. But sometimes it's like they potentially might get on his side, and then you have a group of people around you, which can be quite dangerous for somebody who's traveling on their own. So I started to form a bit of a crowd, and he was demanding to know where I was from. And at this point, if you guys read the book, I've become the ambassador from one unrecognized nation to the nation of Somaliland. So I was working on behalf of this place called Liberland, which is the world's first cryptocurrency based microstate, and it's on an island in the Balkans. So I finally relented. And the only time I've ever lied about where I was from, I was working on behalf of that government. So I was working on behalf of Liberland. And I told him that I was from Liberland. And he was so confused by that, that he just sort of I guess it just sort of circuit broke his rage. And then some guy who was selling belts interceded and sent him one direction and sent me another direction. So yeah, otherwise people are always pretty chill anywhere I go. I've never really, other than being banned from Turkey, I've never really experienced a good deal of antagonism from folks.
Well, there's a little hot travel tip. If you're ever getting antagonized, you just tell them you're from Liberland, and they'll probably back off.
Yeah.
Too
and also
right?
Here's the other hot travel tip is so when you are attempting to sort of put on the "don't mess with me" face, I think people do it wrong, and here's how to do it right. Okay, so the "don't mess with me" face, usually when people are traveling, they put on this sort of hard grimace of yeah, I'm, a badass and watch out because I'm going to do kung fu or something like that. Not the right way to do it, because what that does is it invites aggression. Here's what you have to think. This is the way to become invisible in city centers where there are a lot of touts. You just think, I can't believe he's late or she's late. So the face is I'm looking for somebody who's totally late. You don't have time because he or she is late.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I do every single time.
I love that. I mean, that's a
you're just
great practical tip, because I've definitely done the grimace. You're walking through the city. You're you want to be the person that looks like they have some street smarts, that knows where they're going.
No, just try he's late. Be just anytime
They're
somebody
late.
comes up to you, he's I can't, he's late.
Just I can't believe this.
I've been looking for him for years. I'm never going to find that guy.
I could see how that's very confusing to the touts,
Oh yeah. It's just sorry, I can't right now because I can't believe he's late.
Along those lines, do you have any other practical tips? Learning to get into places you're not supposed to be, for example. Anything around.
Oh man. Yeah, I don't do that. This is something that I wouldn't recommend anybody do, even though I've done it myself a lot. In the book, at one point I impersonated an international journalist by just using the classroom credentials I had for the third grade class that I was teaching, and I just held it up, and they assumed it was a press pass, which was not a great idea. So yeah, I would say that the biggest hack is to immediately make friends with as many people seem trustworthy. Always triangulate your information. So, if you're trying to figure out if this road is safe or that beach is cool to go to. Ask 3 people who don't know each other to figure out if that is the right information or not. Like, ask the aid worker, ask the guy who works at the bar, and then ask your grocer. And then somewhere in that triangulation of information, you'll find what the truth is. Don't ask directions for long distances. Ask multiple short directions. So even if you're if somebody's like, oh, go down that street, take a right, then take another right, already lost me. I know I'm going to take a right, then I'm going to ask directions from the next person up there. So ask directions 3 times along the way. Don't just ask one person for directions. Carry toilet paper. Always. Always have 48 hours of clothes in your bag. Bring a hat, bring a sweater. Normal stuff. Also, you don't need to change your pants that much. Just one pair of pants. It's fine.
There you go. The experience.
Buy good socks.
We can't really parse out the experiences that you had going to these countries with your Peace Corps experience and all the experiences you've had, but just maybe we take this as a travel experiences question. What are some of the biggest, if any, shifts you've seen after this experience and living in Albania with your own guiding principles or your own core values? How much have those changed for you?
Oh man, I was thinking about this just yesterday, and I don't mean to sound super radical because I'm not really in my political thinking, but I, after sort of going through so many nation states being created, after seeing the effect of industrial scale warfare and seeing the inaccuracy and waste of transnational scale aid apparatuses, I trust governments much less, and I trust institutions much less, but I trust individuals much more. I think that individuals are remarkably trustworthy more often than not. I think that you can rely, and I have relied a great deal on, just my I guess spidey senses for if a person is trustworthy and kind and has your best interest in mind. I think you'll run across those people in the world far more than you'll run across large institutions that have the best interests of everybody in mind. And this applies to governments too, because, and I'm not saying that, governments are evil by any stretch of the imagination. They certainly can be. But it's a constraint of their design. They have to maximize for stability. And by maximizing for stability, oftentimes this leads to some pretty heinous behaviors.
Maximizing for stability seems to lead to a lot of up and down instability in some ways.
Yeah, another way of saying it would be exporting instability.
Yeah, it's like the stability it's like a rubber band, right? You're getting stable, and then all of a sudden it snaps. And then, what are some helpful questions you ask yourself? You anything that comes to mind right now? You mentioned a little bit earlier asking yourself a certain question, and I mean, do you have some helpful questions you're asking yourself now that act as prompts to kind of?
Yeah, one of the things that I'm super curious about now is because I'm working on, just sort of tilling the soil to start a project on looking what the future of statecraft is. And the future of statecraft, oftentimes people are talking about this idea of the network state, sovereign individuals. So network state is a decentralized state apparatus, whereas the nation state is married to the land and bounded by geography in some respect, and the network state would be essentially a digital affinity group. While I see so many failings of this transnational system of nation states that we have, and I see so much that it leads us into catastrophe time and time again, I am also thinking that I don't like this idea of like almost a Silicon Valley Apple Watch version of a country. I like part of me just thinks that's gross and weird. Like I like the idea that nation states are these things that are oftentimes like humans themselves. They're deeply imperfect and full of flaws and great darkness and great brightness, and yet they're potentially striving towards betterment, or they can strive towards betterment. The question that I'm trying to figure out right now is how in a interconnected digital world where problems are transnational, but solutions are based upon not only the national level, but power projection to the international level. How is it that we can find a pathway towards identifying global problems, agreeing on global problems, and then acting unilaterally to solve them? One of the things that I think is so fascinating is like, we can't really even agree on what problems are real anymore. It's like, climate change is like, well, that must put you on this side of the political spectrum. So I think here's a thought experiment that I had that I started writing about in the book. And it's like the problem of governance, right? So here's the thought experiment. Aliens are coming to Earth. They're going to blow up Earth. And we've got a week. And the only way that they're not going to blow up Earth is if every capital, every government building in the entire world puts one flag up that's a single color. So the world governance has to agree on the flag, and it has to agree that everybody's going to put it up. And they have to agree on the color, right? And it only has to be up for one day. After that, everybody can take it down. And then the aliens will leave us alone. Do you think that where Earth gets blown up? Mind you, if one flag is not the
right. Oh gosh. Well,
it's terrible, right?
I like to think that we'd be okay. But it only takes one person to
right, and
say,
so
well, I've had enough of this anyway. So
this is this is kind of a riff off of what's called the Byzantine generals problem, which is a sort of like the Byzantine generals problem is like I think it's like from math or game theory, and basically what it says is. It is very, very difficult to establish trust between parties that have no reason to trust one another. So that's how do we create a mechanism where it's possible to get everybody to put up the same flag, if only for a moment. Well,
I was going to ask about, since we're on this topic of sort of futurizing in a way, right? You mentioned Silicon Valley, and that was one of the things, the Silicon Valley Apple Watch version of a country. But, when you mentioned Silicon Valley, is something I was thinking about earlier, way back in the beginning of the conversation, we were talking about, communities and gathering points. Silicon Valley is one of those examples where, okay, people flocked there at a certain period of time because they knew something was happening in technology, and this is where everybody was, and this is where it was happening, back to maybe where the life coaches are gathering in Tulum, or, the tech scene is in Silicon Valley. Yet we have this ability, as you said earlier, to, we can get on Zoom calls and Slack and working remotely, and the whole remote work movement. And so then you have programs like the Estonia e-residency card, where you don't get to live in Estonia, but you can become an e-resident and you can open your business there. There's a lot of value in people coming together geographically to a place that for some reason becomes a hub for X, Y, or Z. It's just creating an environment where people are collaborating on such a level that you can advance and explode much further in an industry, let's say. Pairing that with where nation states are going, where things may be going, talking about a digital, what did you say? A digital, I forget the term you used, like basically a borderless country that's online, let's call it. Where is everything going? Like where do you think, let's project to 200 years from now, let's say, like 1 or 2 generations from now, do we still have 193 member states? Is it going to be going back to like medieval times where, that's some people's theory, where like now this is going to be, everything's going to sort of break apart? And what are your thoughts?
That's like the whole like digital feudalism thing. I think that people like Peter Thiel and Balaji and some of these other folks who are projecting forward to how political units will work in the future, I think that it'll end up being a bit of a patchwork quilt, at least in the meantime. To really put my tinfoil hat on, I think that there are already types of network states that are operating. I think that there are affinity groups of individuals who are easily able to interoperate with one another and combine their wealth and influence in order to essentially operate outside the bounds of traditional taxation, and in between the borders of nation states. That's not always been. The people like this have been around for a long time, previous to World War I, and during the 100 Years' War was fought because of all like this insane matrix of wealthy people who were intermarried with one another, and when one said, "Hey, we're going to war," the rest like kind of had to. But it's much easier now. It's much easier to move money now, and it's much easier to generate consent on the small scale, and to work together with people who you've never met. So I think that will play some role in the nation state matrix. I think that we're already seeing versions of that. I think that we'll have a sort of transnational class, which is continually emerging. And that transnational class will probably have multiple passports, and they're, from a taxation point of view, they'll seek where they can maintain as much of their wealth as possible. And the economic incentive for the system of actual nation states, recognized nation states in the world, will be to do battle for the patronage of that class, so you might actually see something like the emergence of free economic zones, where there's a race to the bottom to see who can tax things the least.
Yeah. You were already kind of seeing a little bit of those types of policies trickle out in some ways. The e-resident thing I used in Estonia could be an example in some ways, right? It's like, well, hey, we want to get some of that tax money, and maybe this is a way to do it, and finding these. Do you think crypto then is the future of global currency?
We'll see. It's certainly a powerful tool. Whether it's the best tool for the job, I don't know. I think it's something that's going to make its way into the economic mixture of the world. And I think, but I think the problem with crypto folks, and I work in blockchain and crypto now, but I think one of the problems that they have with it is there's this enormous blind spot they all have because, well, we've been made enormously rich off of this thing, so it must be the solution to all problems, and it's certainly not a panacea.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And it's certainly not a panacea towards, global peace,
There's a slight bias there.
Yeah, of course. Like, I mean, I work in the industry, but like there are certainly people that are, I think seeing the forest for the trees and think that this is just going to be, the world's going to be a groovy time and there's nobody going to be poor in the entire world as soon as we all have Bitcoin. And I simply don't think that that's the case. There's always been some sort of transference layer, fungibility that has united the world in some respect, be it like, salt or oil or coal or spices or the US dollar or the Portuguese real. Like there's always something. And usually the way that those things change is through violent enforcement of that thing changing. So I don't necessarily think it's a way to lead to the most equitable future. But then again, the future is probably going to be a lot like the past, which is oftentimes full of violence and hopefully less and hopefully more equity. We're doing, decently at that if we can keep it together.
I was going to just plug your book. So You Are Not Here travels through countries that don't exist. Amazing title, amazing book, and definitely recommend it. We're going to link up to that in the show notes. It's just a couple more things, because in the beginning, when you started this journey, you wanted to sort of like the world again, as you said. And at the end of this period of travel and the type of travel you did you feel like this quest made you like the world again? And if so, how?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, part of it is just not writing about warfare all the time. As it turns out, that's not the best for you. But yeah, if you spend enough time meeting people who are passionately pursuing the things that are important to them, and you're experiencing a struggle for greater autonomy and sovereignty in the world, and you're seeing an enormous amount of individuals who are working in whatever small capacity that they have to make their own corner of the earth a little bit better and a little bit more livable for the people around them. If after doing that for a year, you can come back and be like, I'm still not really sold on the whole world thing, I think it's a pretty lame place, then you weren't there. It was a remarkable experience, and I met some incredible people, and so yeah, it's like, have a good deal of hope for the world, and I think that experience really showed me the way to look for it.
Amazing. Book recommendations. We mentioned we were going to get a couple. If you have any other things along the lines of some of the topics we touched on today.
I love War is a Force That Gives Us Meaning by Christopher Hedges. Thought that was a great book. Kind of set me off on this path a little bit. Anything by Sebastian Junger. Tribe is pretty spectacular. Freedom. I know he has a new one coming out now. His book War is also fantastic. Sarajevo Blues is a wonderful book about Sarajevo during the siege. Anything by John Ronson is hilarious and wonderful. Bill Bryson, another OG. Anthony Bourdain, yeah, all those guys. Prisoners of Geography, Guns, Germs, and Steel. I'm sure a lot of people talk about that. I love Yuval Noah Harari, so Homo Deus, Sapiens, all those guys are fantastic. Just really great work. Yeah, I mean, if you have a question about something, and the world is full of an enormous amount of questions about things, fortunately, authors have written books about pretty much all of those things. So you can always just find a book and read about it, and somebody will explain it to you, which is fantastic.
What is the best way for people to get in touch with you? If we're going to link to everything, but do you want to?
Yeah, Instagram, definitely. So my Instagram handle is E Czuleger, E, and then C as in cat, Z as in zebra, ULEGER at Gmail. That's also my Gmail. So send me a line if you want. You can find me. I don't really post on X much. But yeah, Instagram is where I am a lot, making goofy memes. You can also check out my podcast, which is a speculative fiction podcast. It's called Howl, Strange Short Fiction for a Strange Short Existence. You can listen to that if you like science fiction stories.
Yeah, thank you for that. We'll link up to this. And I know this sounds like an out of the blue question, but because you were around so many aid workers and that whole scene, you mentioned kind of losing some of the trust in some of the bigger institutions, but gaining the trust within amongst individuals. What is the best way for somebody, do you think, to help out in a humanitarian crisis situation in a place that's needing, let's say, financial help in terms of giving? And you've seen a lot of these organizations operate on the ground. You've talked to a lot of people involved with some of the bigger ones. Do you feel like that people can confidently help in a particular way?
I honestly wish I knew. I don't have a good answer for that. I think find smaller organizations that were there before a disaster and try to work with them. Always opt for giving to NGOs that are on the ground instead of transnational folks coming in, because obviously there's a lot of overhead that needs to be dealt with. Support people to go into those areas. I mean, I have friends who are traveling healthcare workers, and sometimes they'll need support in order to enter those areas. But peer-to-peer support is, I think, really fantastic. But yeah, in terms of large organizations, I've never been very impressed with what I've seen in terms of their processes. But this also might just be me not knowing their processes very well and just seeing it from an outsider perspective. But I always say, support individuals, support people, or support, or just find people who are close to the situation, and ask for their best advice.
Cool. Do you want to leave us with either a motto you're living your life by right now, or a quote or something that's top of mind? That anything come to mind?
The day after the revolution, the staunchest revolutionary becomes the biggest conservative. So always watch out for who is fighting your revolutions, because afterwards, they're the one in charge.
Awesome.
That's the best I got. Yeah, dude.
I appreciate it, man. Have a great day.
Yeah, take it easy, Jason.
Cheers.
Bye.
There you have it. Thanks again to Eric. Of course, we have the link to everything mentioned in the show notes. And I wanted to close this out with a quote from Eric. And he had a section in the book where he says, "Why I travel." And I'm wondering if this resonates with you. Who knows? I'm still trying to figure out if this is not exactly why I travel, but maybe partially. Here it goes. Why I travel. Quote, "I am afraid of most things. I'm afraid of serial killers, jihadists, and cults of all kind. I'm afraid of brain tumors, the Ebola virus, AIDS, malaria, and guinea worms. Don't look those up. I am afraid of boredom and success and failure. I am afraid of karaoke. Mostly, I am afraid of irrelevance in the face of a world that grows bigger, louder, and more complex every day. This is why I travel, to be a little less afraid of everything." End quote. So there you go. Why Eric travels, and Wondering if that resonates with you. Just a little food for thought as we close this out. And I'll leave you with one more quote from Paramahansa Yogananda, one of my faves, who said, quote, "The season of failure is the best time for sowing the seeds of success." End quote. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time. Peace and love to you and yours. Cheers.
This podcast has been brought to you by ZeroToTravel.com. Ideas and advice to make your travel dreams a reality.